Europe's energy markets remain under pressure, but the balance of power is shifting. As Moscow feels the mounting strain of the war in Ukraine, European nations have moved rapidly to cut their reliance on Russian oil and gas. Alternative supplies, from LNG imports to renewables, are gradually reshaping the continent's energy map. Yet the story is far from over. Russia still wields its vast reserves as a geopolitical weapon, while Europe braces for the challenges of another winter. The clash between energy and politics continues, with global consequences. Join us as we uncover how this struggle for power may redefine the world order. Russia is the largest country on Earth. Spanning more than 17 million square kilometers, it covers twice the territory of China or the United States. But Russia is not only the biggest nation, it is also one of the world's great energy powers. Nearly 40% of the planet's natural wealth lies within its borders, and the numbers are striking. 60% of the world's diamond reserves are found here, deep in the Republic of Yakutia, in Siberia, recognized as the coldest inhabited place on the planet. When it comes to water, one of the most vital resources, Russia holds 25% of all global freshwater reserves, with 4/5 of that concentrated in Lake Baikal. It also contains 22% of the world's forests and leads in resources like iron and nickel, evidence of its immense natural wealth. But in this case, our focus is on hydrocarbons. And here too, Russia is a heavyweight. It usually ranks 7th or 8th among oil producers, at times climbing to 2nd place, providing nearly 10% of the world's supply. It produces 18% of global coal, just behind China and the United States. And with 16.6% of total output, Russia stands as the 2nd largest producer of natural gas after the United States. Still, even if it is not the top producer, with more than 38 trillion cubic meters of reserves, Russia holds the largest proven natural gas reserves worldwide, followed by Iran with 32 trillion. As an energy superpower, Russia relies heavily on revenues from energy sales to drive much of its economy and fuel national growth. Together with its arms industry, energy forms the backbone of Russian exports. For instance, in 2019, official figures show energy contributed 5% of its GDP, 20% of state revenues, and more than 30% of all exports. But this is nothing new. Oil and gas were already a cornerstone of the economy of the former Soviet Union. During the 1970s, the USSR turned into a true oil state. And among the many causes that led to its collapse, specialists point to one in particular: the oil crisis of the 1980s. Crude prices plummeted from $35 a barrel at the start of the decade to under $10 by 1986. A similar scenario triggered Russia's financial crisis of 1998, the result of a chain of events: a sharp devaluation of the ruble, annual inflation of 84% in 1997, and a collapse in tax contributions from the energy and manufacturing sectors. All of it tied to the international drop in oil prices, the single resource that generated the highest share of fiscal revenue for the Russian state. This crisis led to the downfall of Boris Yeltsin and the rise of Vladimir Putin on December 31, 1999. By late 2000, energy exports accounted for nearly 90% of Russia's GDP growth, fueled by soaring oil prices. By the end of 2001, the Russian economy was experiencing one of its greatest booms since 1969. According to experts, every dollar increase in oil prices translated into an additional $1.5 to $2 billion in Russia's export revenues. From his very first day in office, Vladimir Putin launched his plan to reposition Russia as a 21st century superpower. His strategy was clear: rely on the army's support and channel the massive revenues from energy exports as the engine of national resurgence. It is no coincidence that Putin holds a doctoral thesis from St. Petersburg University on the use of Russia's colossal energy resources as a strategic instrument to restore the country's global superpower status. The sudden rebound in oil prices at the start of the 2000s was seized by Putin. He reinvested the windfall into reviving depleted wells, introducing modern technology, and building new infrastructure, such as the Baltic pipeline system and the Primorsk terminal on the Gulf of Finland. But another of Putin's key moves was his battle to wrest control of energy resources from the Russian oligarchs once favored by Yeltsin. These oligarchs had amassed immense fortunes. Putin stripped them of their grip on the sector and created a sovereign fund belonging to the Russian Federation, fueled by revenues from energy exports, most notably those from gas, controlled by the state monopoly Gazprom. Russia's largest company, and one of the biggest in the world, is Gazprom. It controls about 15% of the world's natural gas reserves, along with a significant share of oil. Gazprom has long dominated Europe's gas supply, at times covering up to 80% of imports, and in countries like Finland, Lithuania, and Estonia, the dependency was virtually total. The company not only owns Russia's tallest skyscraper, but also operates the largest gas transportation system in the world. More than 158,000 kilometers of pipelines. This includes the Nord Stream system, built to deliver natural gas to Germany, the United Kingdom, and the Netherlands, as well as a wide network of pipelines across Europe in which Gazprom holds full or partial stakes. Gazprom represents Putin's strategy of expanding Russia's economic influence throughout Europe by exploiting its vast energy resources. It is no coincidence that his chosen successor in 2008, Dmitry Medvedev, once served as chairman of Gazprom. Nor is it a coincidence that Putin has worked to reassert Russia's historic and traditional dominance in the Caspian Sea region, one of the richest energy zones in the world, and the land bridge between Europe and Asia. For years, Europeans have sought to build pipelines through this region to secure independence from Russian gas. It is also no coincidence that Putin moved to annex Crimea. Control of the peninsula grants Russia not only strategic dominance over the Black Sea, but also access to offshore energy reserves. The same applies to eastern Ukraine, a region rich in largely untapped resources. Russia remains the great Eurasian power. Putin knows that the country's natural reserves are vast enough to give Moscow a global hegemonic role. But he also knows that nearly 80% of Russian gas flowing into the heart of Europe passes through pipelines on Ukrainian soil, an advantage he shows little willingness to risk. Still, how did Europe become so dependent on Russian energy? In 1960, only about 6% of Western Europe's oil imports came from the Soviet bloc, and gas imports were negligible. The change over 6 decades has been dramatic. Today, more than half of Europe's gas comes from Russia and Algeria. The roots of this dependency lie in the Cold War. In the 1960s, Washington pressed its European allies not to trade with Moscow. But European capitals no longer wanted to depend entirely on the United States, as they had in the decade after World War II. The turning point was the massive Soviet Druzhba pipeline, which came online in 1964. Communist leaders promoted it worldwide as the pipeline of friendship. By the early 1970s, it had already made countries such as East Germany, Poland, Czechoslovakia, Hungary, Latvia, and Lithuania increasingly dependent on Soviet gas. Then came the Middle East oil shocks of the 1970s. For Paris, London, and Bonn, the lesson was clear. They could not rely solely on oil, particularly Middle Eastern oil. Natural gas, especially Soviet gas, emerged as the alternative. Meanwhile, US influence across the Atlantic was weakening as European demand for energy surged. Ironically, Europe's dependence on Russian and Algerian gas began as an attempt to reduce its reliance on Middle Eastern crude. The Soviet proposal for the Trans-Siberian Pipeline in 1978 was financed by Deutsche Bank with the technical support of German and British industry. Despite US sanctions under Ronald Reagan, the project was completed and inaugurated in 1984. The Trans-Siberian Pipeline became a milestone in Europe's dependence on Russian gas, soon followed by other key projects. Among them, the Trans-Mediterranean Pipeline linking Algeria to Italy. Later, in the early 21st century, came Medgaz, connecting Spain with Algeria, and Nord Stream, which left Germany heavily reliant on Russian supplies. Ironically, Nord Stream was designed to reduce Europe's exposure to Ukraine's unstable politics, even though both the Druzhba and Trans-Siberian pipelines already crossed Ukrainian soil. But how dependent is Europe on Russian energy? In 2021, before Russia's invasion of Ukraine, Europe imported a significant share of its gas from Russia. Since then, the situation has changed dramatically. Russia's share of the EU's pipeline gas imports fell from over 40% in 2021 to around 11% in 2024, and by 2025 statistics show comparatively low levels thanks to a surge in liquefied natural gas imports, energy savings, and new suppliers. These transformations have reduced Europe's dependency, though they have not eliminated it completely. In practice, Europe remained vulnerable in 2022 to 2023. Russian gas was, and in some cases still is, attractive due to its price and because it had long been easy to transport by pipeline. However, a combination of sanctions, supply cuts, and the rapid expansion of LNG imports, coupled with lower consumption, left Russia with a much smaller role than before the war. Which countries depend the most on Russia? The data now varies widely from country to country. Germany. Once heavily reliant on Russian gas in 2021, today only a small fraction of the gas in its system can be directly traced back to Russia, thanks to a pivot toward Norway and the Netherlands. Central and Eastern Europe. Several states sharply reduced their exposure. However, Hungary and Slovakia, along with other countries tied to the Druzhba oil pipeline, have kept high levels of dependence on Russian oil and, in some cases, gas. Hungary, in particular, continues to purchase substantial volumes of hydrocarbons from Russia. Budapest's energy policy has prioritized maintaining those supplies, and by 2024 to 2025, its dependence on Russian crude oil remained very high. Poland, Italy, France, Spain. Since 2022, these countries have significantly diversified their imports, boosting LNG, interconnections, storage, and efficiency policies, leaving their direct exposure to Russia far below 2021 to 2022 levels. In short, the regional picture is uneven. Western Europe quickly reduced its exposure with heavy investments in LNG and alternative sources, while parts of Central and Eastern Europe remain vulnerable due to infrastructure and political choices. Who benefits and who loses? Western sanctions and market decisions dealt heavy blows to Russia's economy. Frozen reserves, corporate exits, and financial restrictions. Yet at the same time, high energy prices, especially during parts of 2022 to 2023, and redirected sales to Asia allowed Russia to offset losses and secure substantial hydrocarbon revenues through 2023 to 2024. Official figures and estimates vary, but Russia continued to post high oil and gas earnings in 2024. Forecasts for 2025, however, point to lower revenues compared with 2024 due to price shifts and logistical challenges. Energy policy as a weapon is no longer a hypothesis. Supply cuts, reduced flows, and threats have all become part of Moscow's strategy, and the economic war has had reciprocal effects on Europe's own economy. The Europe's plan. After the 2022 crisis, the European Union accelerated initiatives to cut its dependency. The Repower EU plan was rolled out, with investments in efficiency, renewables, interconnections, storage, and expanded LNG capacity. The medium-term goal of drastically reducing Russian imports remains in place, and by 2024 to 2025, the EU had finalized investment packages, alternative supply contracts, and infrastructure upgrades. The cost of this energy reorientation has been high and remains the subject of political debate, but the direction has been clear: diversify supplies, save energy, and deploy renewables more quickly. Concrete examples include expansion of LNG terminals, new supply deals with gas-producing countries, and stronger pan-European coordination on winter storage. Yet contradictions remain. Some states maintained or even increased purchases from Russia for reasons of energy security or pre-existing agreements, as in Hungary's case. A global energy crisis. Europe's winter. The fears of an energy crisis at the end of 2022 reflected a mix of supply cuts and soaring prices. Later, thanks to stockpiles, conservation, LNG, and market measures, the risk of an immediate collapse by 2025 has eased compared with 2022. Still, Europe remains vulnerable to price spikes and infrastructure damage, including wartime strikes and refinery attacks. The International Energy Agency and other institutions warned of difficult seasons ahead, but also noted that the crisis has accelerated policy decisions. Greater reliance on renewables, expanded regasification capacity, and tighter coordination. Meanwhile, vulnerabilities persist. The destruction of parts of the Baltic gas infrastructure remains a significant geopolitical factor. The shutdown and destruction of much of the Nord Stream system in 2022 permanently reshaped the outlook for direct supply to Germany and ended the comfortable dependence that once existed. Investigations into the 2022 sabotage continue, with multiple hypotheses and no universally accepted culprits. How is Russia benefiting? Since 2022, Russia has redirected more of its energy flows to Asia, with China and India emerging as the largest new buyers. In 2024, exports to China rose sharply, with data showing year-on-year growth through the Power of Siberia pipeline and other routes. This reorientation, more LNG shipments and higher pipeline volumes to Asia, helped sustain Russia's hydrocarbon revenues in 2023 to 2024. By 2025, however, government forecasts and market analyses point to moderation compared to 2024, reflecting changing prices and logistical pressures. In summary, Russia has shown financial resilience and logistical flexibility in placing hydrocarbons outside Europe. But this resilience does not mean its economy is immune to sanctions, infrastructure attacks, or price volatility. The extraordinary windfalls projected in 2022 to 2023 have not repeated at the same scale each year. 2024 delivered high revenues, but the trend for 2025 suggests a downturn, with official documents projecting lower energy earnings than the year before. So, are we witnessing the birth of a new energy order? What countermove might Russia make against the West? Will the world face another crisis like the oil shocks of the 70s? Or could diplomacy bring about a deal that benefits both sides? Share your thoughts with us in the comments below. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel and share this video. And join us next time as we continue our journey in search of the wonders shaping our world.